They thought money could buy their way out of loyalty, but greed has a price no one can truly afford. When betrayal comes from the ones closest to you, it cuts deeper than any blade. And sometimes the very thing they sold their soul for becomes the reason for their downfall. Don't forget to subscribe, and share for more powerful stories. The boardroom was filled with the heavy scent of polished wood and ambition. Papers rustled, coffee cups clinked, and the faint hum of the city echoed from the glass windows. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, watching the people I once called my partners. My company wasn't just a business, it was my dream, my life's work, the empire I had built from nothing. But what I didn't know was that this very table was about to become the battlefield where betrayal would silently unfold. Congratulations, everyone, I said, sliding the final quarterly report forward. We've crossed record profits this year. This is proof of what loyalty and hard work can achieve. A few forced smiles flickered around the room. I noticed them small, cold, rehearsed. At the time, I brushed it off as exhaustion. After all, late nights and endless negotiations had drained us all. But now, looking back, I realized those smiles weren't exhaustion, they were calculation. Among them were three people I trusted most: Adil, my financial officer; Maya, my operations head; and Rehan, the co-founder who had been with me since the very beginning. We had shared struggles, laughter, and tears. Rehan once sold his car so we could pay the first month's rent for our office. Maya stayed up 3 nights straight with me when a crucial investor threatened to pull out. Adil, he was the one who always said, "We're family, not just colleagues. Family." That word still burns in my chest. After the meeting, I lingered behind, packing my notes. That's when I overheard at low voices near the elevator. "He has no idea," Maya whispered. "Just a little longer. By the time he figures it out, the contracts will already be signed," Rehan replied. I froze, my hand clutching the leather file. My heart pounded so loudly I feared they would hear. But they didn't. They walked away, leaving me with a storm raging inside. Contracts? Signed without me? What could they possibly be planning? That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun with possibilities. Were they negotiating a side deal? Trying to merge behind my back? Or worse, selling everything we had built to the highest bidder? The following morning, I returned to the office earlier than usual. The place was quiet, the kind of silence that makes every sound louder. I entered Adil's office. His desk was always neat, but today there was a folder left slightly ajar. Something about it drew me in. Inside were copies of agreements I had never approved. They were transferring assets, intellectual property, even patents we had fought tooth and nail for, all to another corporation. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. They weren't just betraying me. They were selling me out. For money, Dot, and in that moment, as my hands shook holding those papers, a single thought ran through my mind. If they want war, I'll give them one. The days that followed were a cruel masquerade. I had to smile, shake hands, attend meetings, and pretend as though nothing was wrong. But behind that calm facade, my heart burned with anger, and my mind plotted my every move. I confronted Rehan casually one evening as we walked out of the office. "You've been busy lately," I said, testing the waters. Dot, he gave me that familiar crypt grin. "You know how it is. Always some fire to put out, but his eyes, they betrayed him. Shifty, uneasy, avoiding mine. I wanted to scream at him, to throw the evidence in his face, but I didn't. Not yet. Revenge is not served hot, it's served cold, calculated, and precise. Instead, I turned to someone else, Sarah, my assistant. Loyal, sharp, and quietly observant. She had been by my side for years, watching every move in silence. If anyone could help me uncover the full scope of their betrayal, it was her. Sarah, I said one morning, calling her into my office. I need you to dig into Maya's calendar, Rayhan's meetings, and Adil's recent communications. Don't ask why, just trust me. Her brow furrowed, but she nodded. You think something's wrong? I hesitated, then spoke the truth. I think they're selling me out. For money. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then hardened with resolve. If they're betraying you, we'll find proof. Days turned into weeks. Sarah fed me information, quietly secret meetings at luxury hotels, late-night calls with foreign investors, hidden wire transfers to offshore accounts. Each piece of the puzzle fit perfectly, painting a picture uglier than I imagined. They weren't just selling the company, they were planning to push me out entirely, to erase me from my own empire. One night, sitting in my apartment, I stared out the window at the city lights. My chest ached not from anger anymore, but from heartbreak. These were the people I had loved, trusted, and called family. And for what? A bigger paycheck? A slice of power? But as the pain settled, something else rose inside me. A still resolve. They think they've outsmarted me, I whispered to myself. But this is just the beginning. The next morning, I walked into the office with a calmness that surprised even me. My plan was ready. My allies were few but strong. And as much as they believed they had cornered me, they were blind to one thing. I wasn't a man who surrendered. I was a man who fought back, and this time, I would take back more than what they tried to steal. The office air had grown colder, sharper, like an invisible tension cut into every corner. I could see it in their faces now, their secret satisfaction, the arrogance of believing I was too blind to notice. Rahim laughed a little louder in meetings. Maya carried herself like the throne was already hers, and Adil. He was quieter, calculating, as if already counting his winnings, but I was done being silent. My first move was subtle. I reached out to one of our oldest clients, Mr. Kapoor, a man whose word carried weight across industries. We had worked together for years, built trust through blood, sweat, and contracts that saved both our companies. Over dinner at a quiet restaurant, I leaned in and said, Kapoor, I need you to keep your eyes open. There are talks happening behind my back. If you hear my partners approaching you with any offers, I want to know immediately. He raised an eyebrow. You mean Rayhan and the others? What are they planning? Betrayal, I said flatly. His fork froze midair. Then, without hesitation, he nodded. I owe you too much to stand by and watch. If they come, you'll hear from me first. That was the beginning. Quiet whispers, invisible strings, I was building a web, preparing to ensnare them in the trap they thought they had laid for me. Meanwhile, Sarah uncovered something more damning, emails. She forwarded them late one night, her voice shaking over the phone. They're finalizing a deal, sir. With Arctic Global, the same conglomerate that once tried to buy you out. Rayhan has been leading the talks. They've promised him the CEO chair if the merger goes through. The room spun as I read the words. CEO chair. My chair. They weren't just selling me out, they were replacing me. But if they thought this was checkmate, they hadn't seen my final move. The next day, I called a private meeting with my lawyer, Naveed, and Sarah. We sat in my apartment, papers scattered across the coffee table. They think they can throw me out of my own company, I said, my voice steady but sharp. But I've been playing this game longer than any of them. I want every loophole in our contracts, every clause, every fine print. If there's a way to strike back, I need it. Naveed flipped through the partnership agreement. His fingers paused over a highlighted section. Here, he said, Clause 14. Any transfer of intellectual property or assets without unanimous consent of the founding members is void. Which means, if you have proof they tried this behind your back, their entire deal collapses. A slow smile spread across my face. Proof I had plenty of it now. But I wasn't going to simply ruin their deal. No, that would be too merciful. They needed to feel the weight of betrayal, to know that greed had consequences far heavier than they imagined. That night, as the city buzzed outside my window, I whispered to myself, they betrayed me for money. But when I'm done, money will be the very thing they lose. The boardroom felt different that morning. The polished wood seemed colder, the sunlight harsher through the tall glass windows. They filed in one by one, Maya, Rehan, and Adil, each wearing carefully composed expressions. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded, calm, waiting. Before we begin, I said, I want to address something important. Their eyes flicked toward one another. The silence stretched. Rehan forced a smile. Of course. What's on your mind? I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the emails, the contracts, the hotel reservations. Proof of every meeting, every wire transfer, every lie. Maya's face went pale. Adil shifted uncomfortably. Rehan's grin faltered. You thought I wouldn't know, I said softly, my voice calm but cutting. You thought you could erase me with the stroke of a pen. Sell out everything we built for money. Rehan leaned forward, trying to maintain control. It's business. Nothing personal. My eyes burned into his. Business built on loyalty, trust, sacrifice, but you sold it like it was scrap metal. Maya finally spoke, her voice trembling. You don't understand. Arctic Global promised stability, expansion. We couldn't risk losing everything if the market turned. I laughed bitterly. Stability? By stabbing me in the back? A deal, ever the quiet one, finally broke. We were tired of being in your shadow. You take all the credit, all the spotlight, while we do the hard work. We deserve more. The words stung. They hit deeper than I expected. For years, I believed we were equals family. But now I saw the truth. They never saw me as a partner. To them, I was an obstacle. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch until it choked them. Then I dropped the final blow. I know about your deal with Arctic Global, and I've already spoken with my lawyers. According to Clause 14, your contracts mean nothing. Every transfer you attempted is null and void. The color drained from Rehan's face. But here's the real twist. I continued, my voice growing colder. I didn't just stop your deal. I made my own. I tossed another folder onto the table. Inside were fresh agreements, signed partnerships with new investors, ones loyal to me, ones who now held majority shares in the company. In other words, I said slowly, savoring each word, not only did your betrayal fail, but you've also lost everything. Your shares, your control, your future here. The room erupted in chaos. Maya stood up, her voice shaking. You can't do this. Rehan slammed his fist on the table. This company was built by us too. I stood, meeting their fury with calm resolve. Yes, it was built by us. But it was protected by me. And now it will be rebuilt without you. They had betrayed me for money. But now money had betrayed them. The next morning, Daniel walked into the office with a calmness that unsettled everyone. His suit was sharp, his eyes steady, and his smile carried a confidence that none of them had ever seen before. He wasn't the naive, trusting friend they had once manipulated. No, this was a man who had discovered the truth and was ready to deliver justice. Morning, Daniel greeted casually, placing his leather bag on the desk. Busy day ahead, huh? Clara avoided his eyes, pretending to shuffle papers. Ethan cleared his throat and asked, Yeah, just the usual. What's up with you? Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying them like a predator circling its prey. Oh, nothing much. Just reflecting on how easily trust can be broken, and how greed can blind people to what really matters. Clara's hand froze on the desk. Ethan's jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? Ethan asked, his voice defensive. Daniel smirked. It means, I know, about the fake signatures, the hidden transfers, the lies, everything. The silence in the room was deafening. Clara's face drained of color and Ethan's fists clenched. You're bluffing, Ethan snapped. You have no proof. Daniel calmly pulled out a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. Inside were copies of bank statements, email printouts, and even photographs of their late-night meetings with shady investors. Clara gasped. How did you? Daniel interrupted coldly. He thought I was too trusting, too naive to notice. But the thing about betrayal is that it sharpens you. It teaches you to see what's hidden. Ethan slammed his hand on the desk. You think this changes anything? We already control the contracts. The investors are on our side. You're finished. But Daniel only smiled. You'll see. The tension hung heavy in the air. But what Daniel didn't reveal yet was the ace up his sleeve, the move that would turn their entire scheme against them. And as he walked out of that room, Clara whispered to Ethan with trembling fear, what if he really does have everything? Later that week, Clara and Ethan found themselves invited to a luxurious dinner by one of their trusted investors. The man had promised new funding and bigger opportunities. It was exactly what they needed to keep their crumbling plan alive. But as they entered the candlelit restaurant, their confidence began to waver. The atmosphere felt off. At the head of the table sat the investor, but beside him was Daniel, calm, collected, smiling. Ethan froze mid-step. What the hell is this? Daniel stood, his voice smooth as silk. Oh, just dinner. I thought you deserved a seat at the table. For once, Clara's throat tightened. Daniel, what are you doing here? The investor leaned forward, his tone suddenly cold. Actually, Clara, Ethan, I should be the one asking what you were doing with my money. Clara's eyes widened. What? Daniel slid a file across the table to the investor. Inside were records of how Ethan and Clara had diverted funds for personal luxuries and risky side deals. You thought you could play both sides, Daniel said softly, his voice filled with venomous calm. But you forgot one thing: greed always leaves a trail. Ethan's face turned red with fury. You set us up. Daniel tilted his head. No, you set yourselves up. I just gave the truth a little stage to shine. The investor's eyes burned with anger. You betrayed my trust. Do you know what this means for you? Clara grabbed Ethan's arm, her hands shaking. Ethan, we're finished. But Daniel wasn't done. He leaned closer, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through their panic. This is just the beginning. Everything you built on lies will come crashing down. And when it does, I'll be the one standing. The investor slammed the folder shut and glared at Ethan and Clara. You'll regret ever crossing me. And as the night ended with their world starting to collapse, Ethan and Clara realized one thing: they weren't just losing Daniel's trust. They were losing everything, but Daniel wasn't finished yet. The real downfall was only just beginning. The fallout was immediate. By morning, word had spread through the industry that Clara and Ethan were under investigation for fraud and misappropriation of funds. Investors who once courted them now slammed doors in their faces. The phone calls that used to bring opportunities were now filled with threats and demands for repayment. Clara sat in her apartment, her perfectly curated life collapsing into chaos. Bills piled up on the table, creditors knocking on her door. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, once polished, now hollow-eyed and broken. How did it all go so wrong? She whispered. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling faster. His arrogance had been replaced by paranoia. He stayed up at night, pacing, drinking, muttering about Daniel. He's not done. He's still out there, waiting, watching, and he was right that Daniel didn't gloat publicly. He didn't need to. Instead, he moved silently, strategically. He met with old clients and reassured them of his integrity. He presented himself as the victim of betrayal who still chose honesty over corruption. Slowly, the same industry that had once turned on him began to open its doors again. One night, Ethan received an anonymous message on his phone. Just a single line: "The higher you build on lies, the harder the fall." Ethan's hands trembled as he dropped the phone. He knew it was Daniel, and he knew the nightmare was far from over, but the real blow, the one that would shatter everything, was still on its way. Daniel's final move came with precision. He had quietly been working with a journalist, providing evidence, recordings, and documents that painted Clara and Ethan's betrayal in vivid detail. The article went live on a Monday morning, and by noon, it was everywhere. Business partners' betrayal, greed, lies, and the man they tried to destroy. The story spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with outrage. Clara and Ethan's faces were plastered on every feed. Every headline. Clara sat frozen on her couch, scrolling through the comments. How disgusting. They deserve everything. Coming to them. Karma always wins. Tears blurred her vision. She had built her identity on reputation, on the illusion of success, and now the world saw her for what she really was. Ethan wasn't faring any better. Reporters camped outside his building, cameras flashing, neighbors whispering. Investors demanded their money back, and lawsuits began to pile in. Meanwhile, Daniel walked down the street, calm and composed, as his phone buzzed with messages of support. Former clients, new investors, even strangers who admired his resilience. For the first time in months, he felt the weight of betrayal lifting, but Daniel knew one thing: this wasn't just about reclaiming his place in the industry. This was about proving a lesson they would never forget. When you betray someone for money, you might win for a moment, but in the end, greed always takes everything away. And as Clara and Ethan's worlds crumbled around them, Daniel smiled not with malice, but with quiet satisfaction, because justice had finally been served. It was late evening when Clara finally decided to face Daniel. She couldn't live another day drowning in shame without at least trying to plead her case. She showed up at his office, no longer in her designer clothes, but in something simple, almost plain. Her eyes were tired, her voice shaky. "Daniel, please, you don't understand. I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered, standing in the doorway like a shadow of her former self. Daniel didn't look up immediately. He was reviewing contracts, his life finally back on track. When he did meet her eyes, there was no hatred, just a cold, steady calm. "You made your choice, Clara," he said evenly. "You and Ethan both. You sold trust for money, and trust doesn't come back once it's broken." Clara stepped closer, desperation leaking into her words. "But you got what you wanted. You got your reputation back. Everyone believes you now. Why keep destroying us?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourselves. I just let the truth be seen." For the first time in her life, Clara had no words. She broke down, sobbing softly, before stumbling out of his office. Daniel didn't chase her. He didn't need to. That chapter was closed. Ethan, on the other hand, wasn't so willing to accept defeat. A week later, Daniel received word that Ethan was spiraling caught drunk in public, fighting with reporters, even threatening lawsuits against imaginary enemies. The once arrogant businessman was now a walking cautionary tale. Daniel watched the coverage silently. This wasn't triumph anymore. It was tragedy. Ethan had built his empire on greed, and now that empire had swallowed him whole. Months passed. The dust settled. The lawsuits drained what little money Clara and Ethan had left. They disappeared from the spotlight, Clara retreating into quiet obscurity. Ethan fading into irrelevance. Daniel, meanwhile, rebuilt stronger than ever. His company thrived, not just because of his skills, but because people respected him more now. He had proven that integrity could withstand betrayal, that patience could outlast greed. One afternoon, standing in his new office overlooking the city skyline, Daniel reflected on everything. The betrayal, the pain, the revenge, it had all shaped him into who he was now. He didn't hate Clara or Ethan anymore. He didn't need to. Their downfall had been their own doing, and he had no desire to carry their weight any longer. Instead, he carried only one lesson forward. Money can buy comfort, but it can never buy loyalty. Betrayal comes at a cost, and in the end, greed leaves you with nothing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel smiled quietly. His story wasn't one of bitterness, it was one of survival, justice, and renewal. And though the scars of betrayal would never fully fade, they had become reminders of his strength, because in the end, those who betrayed him for money had lost everything, while he had gained something priceless: freedom, respect, and peace.